part 2 of an interview with Guido Preparata on Conjuring Hitler, How Britain and America Made the Third Reich.
Welcome to another episode of Our Interesting Times. It is my pleasure to have Guido Giacomo Preparata. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yes.
Okay.
That's good.
Okay, Guido Giacomo Preparata. He is an assistant professor of political economy at the University of Washington. Born in Boston, Massachusetts, raised in the USA, France, and Italy. He completed his PhD in political economy and economics history at the University of Southern California in 1998. He is an author, an essayist, a blogger. His website is GuidoPreparata.com, GuidoPreparata.com. He is the author of several books, including The Ideology of Tyranny and Conjuring Hitler. Conjuring Hitler is a book that we'll be talking about today. A fascinating analysis of the events that led to the rise of the Third Reich and the Second World War. In this book, here's the abstract of the book that he provides. In the first 50 years of the 20th century, witnessed Britain's determination to annihilate the threat of German hegemony on the continental landmass. The British Empire feared that a possible merger of the German Reich with the Russian Tsarist Empire might have given birth to a much-dreaded Eurasian alliance. A fastness in the heart of Eurasia would have attracted in its orbit men, resources, and geographical advantages in such numbers that it would have threatened and eventually foiled British imperial domination across the world. To prevent such an alliance, Britain embarked upon an extraordinary feat of aggression, which began with the Great War, 1914-1918. This act followed up by the 15-year-long incubation of Hitlerism, which Britain would eventually need to set up Germany in the view of a second two-front world conflict that would have sanctioned the erasure of German rivalry once and for all. Okay, that's a synopsis of your book, an excellent synopsis. So this is a challenge to the official narrative, the moralistic tale we've been given to the Second World War and perhaps the entire 20th century, the world that depends on British and also American enlightenment to protect and extend freedom and extend civilization to the rest of the globe. So, hey, how do you want to get into this? What's the best way to get into this topic?
Well, yes. I guess it's the greatest militant myth of our epoch, and how I got into it originally was not to challenge anything. I was working at the Central Bank of Italy. I was in my 20s, and I decided to do something, sort of research a topic that would be fancy, and I decided to look into Nazi finance, and then that prompted a variety of questions, and I decided to investigate the whole story, and that's how the book began. And as I was reading a variety of other sources on this story, and so it didn't start as a desire to challenge anything, but more of just going to more depth into some of these fancier, more esoteric themes, such as, for instance, as I said, what allowed Germany to get out of depression and in the 30s and achieve what was then defined as an economic miracle. So that's how it started. Yes, well, the way I see it as a political economist is that for me, financial power is an auxiliary. It's crucial, and nowadays in the modern, hyper-modern era, fundamental, if not primary auxiliary. But I think that the direction of the game, for me at least, is still in the hands of political strategists. I don't think that bankers and financiers have the vision for the ultimate vision for the management of power. Although they understand their sectors perfectly, and they are, and these things have been explained in the old, for instance, in the old political school of the Germans pre-World War I. There was this famous scholarship that said that corporations were born, the joint stock idea were originated with the Venetians when they were accompanying the Crusaders. And I think that's exactly how it is. The crusade is set in motion, and around it forms this galaxy of financial economic interests, very well organized, very subtle, that accompanies this movement for conquest, this wedge for power, which is directed by, for me, strategists, real political minds.
Now, in the war itself, we talk about this financial combine. We mentioned I.G. Farben, but throughout the war, you have these complex relationships that persevere, that exist throughout the war between Standard Oil, Union Banking. That's you tied with the Bushes, Prescott Bush, and that was exposed somewhat. That
came out in a U.S. Senate investigation, right? 1942. It was. Yeah, I mean, it's not what you say. People say it's conspiracy theory. Well, no, it isn't. Yeah. It's an act of the U.S. government.
Yeah, and I think Prescott Bush went off and founded the USO as a PR move, and they stopped talking about it. But that's the basis of his fortune, was his ties to the Fritz Thyssen steel combine, I think, or dynasty. But what I'm getting at is that throughout the war, I mean, a good example, I think you had these continuing arrangements where Standard Oil facilitated the acquisition on part of the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, of this crucial tetraethyl, the aviation fuel. You have them working with I.G. Farben, producing, I guess the patents played a big part in them producing synthetic oil. That was a big part of their war effort. Of course, the role of IBM. I mean, yes. Auschwitz-Birkenau, first and foremost, was a huge industrial concern that, that IBM was involved with. IT&T. So these banking interests, the Rothschild Bank was never raided in France by the Nazis. So you have all I think these, at a meta level, you have all these financial, corporate, transnational relationships that don't seem to be sundered by the war.
No. What I remember was that also the plants, the Ford and GM plants were not firebombed either. And there's also literature. I guess there's an author who specializes in this, and where the idea was that there's these few rotten apples who have done business with the Nazis, and I guess it's part of this economically deterministic view that it's just people are out there that are there to make money eventually lead to these disastrous arrangements. But we all know that government, we all know that contracts at those levels, industrial contracts at those levels, do not happen without government approval. And we go back to the question where before, who's in charge? It's the political power, and these economic potentates do not have the autonomy to act alone.
Now, of course, into the war, you mentioned the Operation Barbarossa. This is this fateful decision by Hitler to invade Russia. Initially successful, it drives very deep into Russia and comes very close. I mean, getting to Moscow. Of course, there's Stalingrad, his drive south because of oil, economic interests. This blunts, I guess, the offensive towards Moscow.
Yes.
A blunder, perhaps. But of course, this event inevitably closes out this phase. You kind of close it out around 1943, and that's kind of when the fortunes of war decisively turn against Germany, because you have Stalingrad, Kursk, and that, after all, it's all downhill. This eclipse of German power, and let's say the beginnings of the Cold War. I want to get into that a little. I know it's not a big part of your book, but it helps explain why this story that you write about in Conjuring Hitler is still so relevant today.
Yeah, well, it's to be honest with you, we all read these books, and there are various opinions about everything. Military historians will tell you that it was one battle that decided everything. Others deny it. And the fall of France, for instance, which I don't deal with in my book, which is very strange, right? In 6 weeks, they disappear, and they don't lift a finger for the rest of the war. Very strange. So we have all this big military historians that tell us, well, yes, they made the Germans made this very successful advance. The French were unprepared, and this and that. And I just don't buy it. There must have been something else in the elite behind this. The country doesn't just disappear, not France, at least. Likewise, in the military history of the campaign of Russia, there's a monumental literature about this, and I obviously have not covered it all. I've read many things. We read that the war was lost in 1943. I have even read reports that the Vatican was informed that the Germans had completely lost the war in 1941 by failing to secure God knows what strategic advantages. Now we're getting into the very deep mechanics of these things, and I don't know, but for some reason, this is from the Vatican's viewpoint, the war is even finished even sooner than 1943. What happened there? Who knows? And it seems strange that the Germans, for all their military prowess, could have completely miscalculated and made the mistake that Napoleon did, and even on a grander scale. It's so full of great mysteries. Yes, and after that, the game changes entirely. Germany is absorbed and begins this other production that we were discussing a few seconds ago, whose abiding manifesto, whose abiding revealing document is, of course, George Orwell's 1984. And it might have been cited a million times. There's nothing original in mentioning that novel, but those few pages of the secret book in 1984 where Orwell explains how the game is to be played, for me, still stand for then and today, right? This ongoing war against, Oceania and so on and so forth. It seems like, now North Korea, it's the same game.
Yeah, it's the endless war. It's we forget. The World War II is a good example of that because almost on a dime, Soviet Russia turns into the villain when it was proclaimed a hero during the war in the American press. Stalin. You have movies like Mission to Moscow about by Davies, Joseph Davies, the ambassador there.
Yes,
North Star. All these movies that Stalin is actually there to defend freedom and democracy of all things. And then all of a sudden the Cold War kicks in 1946-47, and they're the villain. And that's very Orwellian, very Orwellian.
It is, and still now Putin, and but the feeling I have is that it's a grand charade. It's just a grand theater. They're all playing. It's not that it's not even that they're inventing the enemy. It's like there's a script and everybody is playing. And I think that a lot of people like playing the villain. And I'm thinking also, of course, of this Islamic terror. And let's face it. I mean, for actors, playing the villain is sometimes very exciting. No?
Yes. And of course, the supposed today's terrorist threat grows out of the Cold War because you have the Mujahideen in Afghanistan.
Yes.
And of course, I alluded to Gladio and what was going on in Europe and sort of the terrorism, the days of lead, and in Europe, which now has been exposed as a NATO operation. These stay-behinds that were perpetrating false flag terrorist attacks to change the political environment. And of course, that raises all types of questions. What goes on everywhere in terms of terrorism, whether it's here in the United States or somewhere else? Is it being fomented to create a strategy of tension, as Vincenzo Veneguera testified to?
Yes. Well, I've written a long piece about the strategy of tension. Of course, this was a big thing because in Europe we had 10 years of terrorism. So when we hear about terrorism, I mean, we know. And what we know is, and many mysteries have not been revealed, but we're cynical enough to know that virtually the political bureaus of the police can create terrorists out of anything they want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
For a while, I bought myself into Gladio a lot, but frankly, after I looked at the Italian case, well, no question. I mean, Italy is a U.S. colony, so of course the U.S. is present all over the place. But there was very much in Italy. I mean, I'll say this briefly because it doesn't belong to this conversation. Yeah. It was very much an attack on a certain political establishment, which had also very strong U.S. backing, but U.S. backing began to be divided, and these were the Christian Democrats, and they came under attack, and they were very much in charge, in the Vatican II of the country. And in order to do this, immediately out of nothing, all these political and terrorist formations appear, mushrooming out of nowhere for 10 years, and will just go on a rampage. And we've seen this, and we saw how artificial all of it was, even though some of it was rooted in discontent and in political movements. But we know that there are some bureaus in the ministries and in the apparatus that have maneuvered these groups, and we've been told and given an idea of how these things are done. So, terrorism, and they say, well, it's the weapon of the weak. It's the exact opposite. It's a military army in the hands of power for a different type of gain.
Yeah, and with Gladio, we see, of course, the role of these strange Freemasonic organizations like Propaganda Due and the various people belong to it, because if you look at the people belong to it, like, Silvio Berlusconi, the police ministers, so it's sort of a state within a state. So it's sort of a practical way that one achieves these things by suborning and undermining the state by creating a state within a state. These networks of criminal networks,
Well, there's always, Well, there are always factions, and the factions, it depends. When a certain faction decides to attack another, that's when these things happen. And generally when you have these movements, you are in a civil war, in a civil war context. And generally, they also use terrorist groups to do this, which are created by targeting a certain kind of psychological profile of people who are in the movements and so on. So, in terms of Gladio and so on and so forth, I don't know. I certainly know how this was. I appreciated and I studied how this was done very much as a turf war amongst factions who battle for control of the establishment. In that case, was in Italy, but they do it all over. It can happen anywhere, depending on where that is. And you're bound to see these things emerge, but they are, let's call them techniques of power. This creation and management of terrorist organization.
Yeah, and of course, the Cold War itself can be, I think, can be fairly described as a strategy of tension writ large.
Yes, I would agree with that.
Going back to the Second World War, of course, we have this right after the end of the war, because we have the strange dealings with Allen Dulles in Switzerland, with SS General Wolf negotiating the Rat Line and these things. The stories of what's his name? Hitler's.
You're talking about Paperclip and all that?
Paperclip, and also the Nazi, the Bormann capital flight. That was set up in July 44 after Stalingrad. And, well, what I'm getting at is here when you talk about factions, and you can see some of these, whether it's false flag terrorism, these fomented wars, or what's going on, is often we tend to look at the elite as monolithic, and we shouldn't do that because no grouping of people are monolithic. But right after the Second World War, we might get a glimpse of this. I want to see if you agree with this analysis, because we had the exposure of the Rosenbergs, Alger Hiss, right in the late 40s, and I've kind of look at this as one faction going after another faction of elite, because roughly in the United States you had a, for lack of a better word, after the war, a pro-German, pro-Nazi Dulles faction, fascist faction, going against the Morgenthau, more leftist communist faction, and you can see it played out with the exposure of Alger Hiss. And because it was decided by Dulles that West Germany was needed as a bulwark against the East, the Warsaw Pact, so it needed to be built up, and Morgenthau's plan was scrapped. And we kind of see it, and that kind of forms the contours of the Cold War. Is that a defensible analysis, do you think?
Yeah, no doubt. I agree. I mean, sometimes it's monolithic, sometimes it isn't. I mean, briefly, in Italy in 1970s, the Catholics, for good or ill, came under attack, and the communists tried to seize power. So there was civil war, in a sense, low intensity civil war, they call it. So at that point, they were no longer friends. In the case of the United States, yes. So you mentioned Alger Hiss, and Harry Dexter White, and all that. And they pretty much sacrificed all these people who had been the ones who had been in touch with the Russians at the time when they were needing to finish the war, where they were allies. And yes, I've read a lot about Alger-Hiss, a lot, as much as I could. Still could not understand what happened there, and very crucial, because also in those events you understand there's no question that a faction was being liquidated, no question. Mm-hmm. And I think to this faction belonged also people like very interesting American politicians like Wallace, the Secretary of Agriculture, who had different ideas. And I think I heard that he is a key figure in Oliver Stone's documentaries about the hidden face of history, mm-hmm. which I haven't seen, but I think he's featured prominently in that one. And that group, there's a group which is eliminated, no doubt. What was happening, I do not know, but I know these are essential aspects for understanding the further development of the Cold War, also because they feature other figures of which the most important of whom I think is one of the most important is Richard Nixon, and Nixon was one of the inquisitors with the Committee on Un-American Activities in eliminating this faction. So that would tell us exactly what was happening. As to Germany being now recuperated and given a second virginity as a bulwark against Russia, I don't know. At that point, Germany was just defanged and absorbed. And I think the game was different. And I've had discussions with German journalists and others asking me what I thought of Paperclip. I don't know. I feel that when the war is over at that point, whatever happens to these other Nazis that are recycling the U.S., I always personally, but I may be wrong, I always found that part of history less interesting, because at that point they are a breed that's completely defeated, mm-hmm. and politically insignificant at that point. So I don't know if they were that important through the pro-Nazi channels. I'm not even sure that Dulles was all that pro-Nazi. I think he was just like Norman. He was a very skilled manipulator and person who was just making things done, appearing to be friends with people that he ultimately despised for the purposes of furthering the agenda of the power he worked for. Maybe. Of course, I don't know.
The Dulles brothers were both at Versailles, correct?
They were young lawyers working for us, that firm, that critical firm in New York, Sullivan, Cromwell, whatever. Yeah.
Which represents all the corporations through which the CIA actually works for.
No. Dulles is an absolutely essential figure and close to the Jesuits. His son was a Jesuit. Mm-hmm. Also, that connection with the Vatican. As we read through these biographies, fascinating. I always exclaim, if we only knew, what really went down with these people. Well, we can only.
And the Cold War is critical in getting the Vatican on board the Cold War agenda, because putting the fear of godless communism into the Vatican played a big part in suborning the Vatican, I think, part of the CIA.
Absolutely. Yeah, I told that story in a piece that written by a book by Sean Stone, Oliver's son, and I go into great lengths about what the Vatican did, its position between the two wars, and it's incredible. Mm-hmm. And we know very little, and most of what has happened is, again, I found in this the historiographic digging of this French historian I was mentioning before in a book about the Vatican and Nazism, which I found fantastic. And actually, it seems that the church had bet on two horses. One was the Germans, oddly enough, because it thought that the Germans, through their invasion of Germany, were going to win. And they thought that, allegedly, according to the secret protocols of the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact, that the church, the evangelizers of the church, were going to follow the German troops in rechristianizing the USSR, which is like
really?
Yes, it's written in that book, and if her evidence is good, this is something that Pius XII, he's a taboo argument. We know that after his death, the nun that lived with him as his companion, basically his confidant, apparently the legend has it that she has burned mounds of private correspondence. So So big mysteries are there. Mm-hmm. At the event, there seems to be no doubt, and this jives with some of the things that I've researched for Conjuring Hitler, that, and we know that the Catholic Church supported Hitler. No question. They certainly didn't allow Schleicher, the general, the so-called Red General, of staying in power, and Pacelli, who was then the nuncio, he was the nuncio, he was the ambassador of the Vatican in Germany, and then became Secretary of State before becoming Pope, definitely supported the old aristocracy, the von Pappens, who were all Catholics, who supported Hitler in turn, and swayed the Catholic vote for Hitler. So they were supporting, and this is why they're getting a lot of fire from the ultra-patriotic French. So there's a giant debate of those days. And so I think that they were planning on rechristianizing the USSR, which was their giant nemesis, but crafty and careful negotiators that they are, because they understand politics very well, they also very much kept a foot in the American camp. And so they had very close contacts with all of that other galaxy, the Dulles and more, and the Knights of Columbus, and there was, that all the U.S. Catholic world through people like that famous cardinal, what was his name? Well, very famous, the Archbishop of New York. Well, it will come to me. And this is what I was saying. They were informed, and they are very well informed, that the Germans had failed, and at that point they extricated themselves from their commitment with the Germans and threw themselves completely in the arms of the Americans, and sealed ever since a very close entente. And this is, and you could follow the history of the church, which is very complex, and there's very little, very obscure and impenetrable, but the presence of the U.S. in the church is very strong.
Mm-hmm. Now, one other thing, how much time do we have?
As much as you want.
Okay. I'm not taxing you too much.
No, not at all.
Okay, good. Just want to make sure. Another element, of course, through the First and Second World War, because a critical element in bringing America into the Second World War, the First World War and the Second World War, was was Zionism. Of course, the Balfour Declaration was backed up with a promise of using Jewish influence in the United States within the Wilson administration to get the country into the First World War. Of course, agitation in the Second World War was key too. That the whole thing with with Charles Lindbergh and these things. The American First Committee and all that. Of course, the fulfillment of the Zionist vision was greatly, I think, wouldn't have been possible without the catastrophe of the Second World War. So you have the sort of this coming out of Zionist power, Jewish power here in the United States. Of course, up until the 60s, I think you still had the WASP elite running things, and then you had the sort of this, by this late 60s and 70s, you have this coming of age of Zionist power, of Jewish power here in the United States, and the neoconservatives. Mm-hmm. Because the neoconservatives played a big part in U.S. foreign policy after the 1970s.
Yes.
Do you have anything to say on that?
Yeah, sure. Ever since the book came out, I guess a number of people just say, well, what you're really saying is that when you mean bankers, you mean Jews and Masons, right? And I say, no, absolutely not. I don't see it that way at all.
I'm sorry, it was Cardinal Spellman?
Spellman, excellent. Exactly.
There you go. Sorry, I was thinking about that name in the back. Yes. What's that name? Cardinal Spellman of New York. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. So no, I don't personally, I don't believe much in this in the 300 rabbis that decide the fate of the world, as Rathenau once said, he himself a Jew, and for me it's not that. In the end, the Mackinder context explains everything already. So that's the thing. And yes, the creation of Israel, as you said, the Balfour Declaration was it, and it is itself a product of the Mackinder program. The idea was to create faults, as they call them in the jargon, areas where there must be a constant earthquake, perennially seismic, and one is of course Poland, because that's what stands between Russia and Germany, and there are various all over the place around, because the landmass is enormous. And in the southern periphery of the western part of the landmass, there is Israel. And so they created this thing, and they populated it with very ardent nationalists, as the British strategists themselves have described. And then it's been like that, the center of agitation. And then the whole thing just colored itself with a variety of racial, political undertones, but we all know that is just, like it's a superimposed thing that has nothing to do with creed or anything. Mm-hmm. It's a play of fanaticisms that have been somehow grafted onto just another thorn that has been planted that in the Arab world to create a state of perennial destabilization, and that's what they have to do. Of course, they were expecting that this place to become a peaceful haven of God knows what, but that was never the plan. It was meant to be a country of perennial war, and in fact, that's what it is.
Yeah.
And that's it. I don't believe that the Zionist lobby is what influences American politics. Even a Zionist like Noam Chomsky himself said repeatedly that the United States stopped funding Israel would disappear in 2 seconds. So.
It's a question of some people refer to it as the Anglo-American Zio Empire, and I don't know. I mean, who's the junior partner in that relationship? It's a genuine question. I don't know the answer to. I think at times, like anything, I think power waxes and wanes depending on the circumstances. Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not an expert on Israeli politics by any stretch. I mean, I visited. I was in Israel when I did my tour in the Middle East about 10 years ago. No, I mean, it's, as we said in the beginning, I mean, what we're observing right now is just a continuation of the British Empire and everything that, and the United States are doing it for them, with their brawn and their resources. And this is why there's a lot of, good movements in the United States that are saying, enough of this, and enough of this, especially in the name of peace.
Yeah. And I think your point about fomenting fanaticism is key on both ends, because if you really look at the Middle East, you have this, you have NATO, America, and also Israel fomenting Islamic fanaticism.
Sure. I mean, we all know that before. I mean, this Islamist thing is a very, very recent thing. They say, I mean, that it started very slowly after the final war, the one in 73 of the Yom Kippur, after which Arab nationalism was on its knees, and so they had to come up with something else, and so they went back to this Islamic pride and the veil and all that. But before then, it was nothing of this in the Arab world. It was a very secularized. It could have been a fantastic place. Beirut was the symbol of what the Middle East could have been had we had peace. Regardless, and it's a recent invention, and it's a recent invention whose grand rehearsal, and this is something about which nobody speaks, was tested by the French in Algeria. And that is when they started creating, again, speaking of these terrorist groups, artificially incubated the GIA, the Islamist groupings. Those were, and there's a fantastic book, which I don't think has been translated in English. I would like to do that at some point, by a former Algerian intelligence agents that just recounts the story of how they created these things to wage the battle for political power in Algeria. And that story was extraordinarily violent. Horrible things have happened, but nobody discusses it. And that has been the very first act of this Islamic story, which nobody knows really, but that's important.
Now, bring it up to probably how to close this interview out is bring up to contemporary times. Is the Mackinder Doctrine, I think, is still in play, of course, and we have this attempt to recreate the Cold War with the Russians, with this sort of demonizing of Putin. I think it was William Engdahl has written much about this, about trying to prevent this Anglo-American strategizing to prevent the formation of a Eurasian alliance. He seems to think that there might be a Eurasian alliance being formed anyway because of NATO aggression. What's going on today vis-a-vis Russia and China and this sort of this what we're seeing the possibility of this formation of a Eurasian alliance? Because if you look at China itself, Russia and China are also very infiltrated with Anglophiles. So what's the possibility of this occurring? What's your take on that?
I know. Yeah, it's a good question. We all wonder what it is. It's so very strange because in a way, we very much could have peace because what the Eurasian Commonwealth could do was just to come and just say, and what they're doing, the Silk Road and the Grand Trans-Eurasian Highway, and just say to the United States, come, be a partner of it, and let's just get rich. And that would be the end of it, But, no, there seems to be a clause against it. And so my feeling is that it's understood. And Putin has said this in these I should say, strange, interesting interviews that have appeared, the Megyn Kelly and the Oliver Stone interviews that have been aired, and saying presidents come and go, the policy is always the same. And that's what he means. And he also makes these little jibes saying they don't consider me a European leader. So it's just a way of saying, you will never, this is the game, and if you want to be the macho Putin, you will have to do just what you're doing and never think of coming to Europe. And I think he's okay with it. And so they're all playing this theatrical play. And I think they're just getting ready to, as I said, they're just preparing another re-edition. They're studying another re-edition of the Cold War, where now North Korea is going to have a bigger role, allegedly. Interesting place, North Korea, and a lot to say about that. And I don't think well, there's the Shanghai organization, but I don't think they will break through the barrier and open to Europe. Now Europe has been completely crystallized around this new NATO understanding, and they're keeping it this way so far. And so the divisions continue. So I think that overall the British veto remains, but there are changes ahead. Something's going to happen. Also economically, we've had 10 years of stagnation after the Lehman Brothers collapse. Something is going to happen. They are re-engineering the game here, but I don't foresee that they're going to revolutionize what's going to happen. I think Putin is comfortable playing the new Stalin in a way, but kind of a posher, more amiable, more
yes.
glossier Stalin.
Stalin with a human face, right?
Macho. He's cool. He does judo. He's appealing, and that's what these interviews are trying to convey. And I don't know. What's your impression? How do you feel from how do you look upon all these this flow of information?
Well, it's hard to really assess it because sometimes I feel like we're all being played. I don't think it's like it's New World Order. They're all in control. It's all a game. I do think there's some genuine opposition on the part of Russia. What Russia represents as a people, a culture, history. Not so much Putin, because a lot of people get stuck on the personality. It's the powers that Putin is representing. It's complex. I talked to a few Russians. They can't stand Putin because he's corrupt. And but then again, some think, well, he's standing up for Russia. He's this resurgence of orthodoxy, which I think is a healthy rebalancing of things. Because what's happened, the West, I think, is in a high advanced state of corruption. Maybe it's Freemasonic. I'm a Catholic, and the Catholic Church is very troubled right now, I think, as an institution. Whether it can rebound and fulfill its mission, as a
forgive me. No, go on. I'll tell you something later.
Yeah. So it's one of these things hard to figure out. I'm a little intimidated by all, but saying I can figure it all out. I just think from a health, it's good that we're getting some pushback, and maybe it will promote a sane, more balanced policy on the part of NATO and the West. Because I do think this lack of a check since the end of the Cold War has been a corrupting influence. That's obvious by NATO's lunge eastward in the end of the Cold War. And so, to the extent that Putin can provide a check, a counterbalance, and encourage some sobriety on the part of the West, we might get edged closer to a world that's a bit more peaceful and a bit more prosperous. And maybe that's all I can really realistically hope for in this fallen world. So.
No, I appreciate what you're saying, and then because you mentioned that I am at the University of Washington. I have left the University of Washington a long time ago.
Oh, okay.
The last 5 years I've been at the Pontifical Gregorian University. I've been working.
Yeah, I was reading from your book. Yes.
Yeah. No. It's just not, this is not to correct you, but it's just going back. I've seen the Vatican from within. Mm-hmm. and I'm telling you, if you said you're Catholic and, from one Catholic to another, it doesn't look good.
Yeah.
It doesn't look good at all. It's actually revolting. And I will say no more now, but we can have that conversation.
Yeah.
The time. And another thing, me too. I have the same desires you do. I want to see peace. I want to see people have fun. And I want to see our surplus being spent in actual real theaters and art and hospitals and not bombs. And we all understood on this. But then again, and we hope that, for instance, other powers could just come in as a sobering effect, as you say. But then again, let's just think about this. The state of New York in America alone produces as much wealth as Russia as a whole. So, and so what could Russia possibly do?
Yeah.
So in the end, the levers are in other hands.
Yeah. But hopefully its vastness can check it. Yeah, that's always been the case, right? Its vastness has checked other.
But yeah, I know some friends of mine. Likewise, like they tell me what yours have told you, and they tell me that St. Petersburg and Moscow are very high tech, but the vastness, the parts of the country that are in the Middle Ages.
Yeah.
So it's are we really talking?
Upper Volta with nuclear weapons, as they used to say.
Yeah. I don't know. You're right. We need to hope, and let's hope something changes and not get just too calcified in pessimism.
But I think that's the point, because if you look at it, this Europe's technology, Russia's resources, and China's factories, the odd man out are the Anglo-American Empire, because there's no need for the dollar, and that's what they're trying to break up. This whole idea of the Silk, you want the sea power wants to make again goes back to Mackinder, as the sea power disrupting this Eurasian alliance of trade that the sea power that Leviathan can't disrupt when it wants to, stranglehold.
I know. I wish it were so simple, because on the other hand, the Anglo-American tandem is it's a tandem full of vitality, though.
Yeah.
They have so much energy. And I just spent 6 months in Taiwan, and I can tell you that, and I've toured the world, and everybody wants to be American, and I've seen British flags everywhere, and doormats, baby prams, apparel. There's a mystique, and the U.S. is a place of great creativity and great dynamism. And as many say, the peace will have to come from Americans, probably because the obstacles to peace and because there's so much weaponry and a cult to war. But because Americans lived amongst that, those who want peace will be the strongest forces, and those who will know best what to face and how best to overcome it. And through them will probably come the solution. And I think this is possible, and I really hope so.
I think it comes from a lust to dominate, which is Luciferian.
What? I'm sorry?
A lust to dominate, which is Luciferian and demonic in its final analysis.
Sure.
If you doubt that, just Henry Kissinger, this American statesman, in 1974, wrote in National Security Study Memorandum 200 that
Kissinger? Of course. Yeah, well, Kissinger, the world famous Kissinger, right?
Yeah, he called for increasing the death rate in the Third World by 20%. Because that would free up resources for the existing American corporations. Because you say American, they're really transnationalists. They have no, they don't.
I know. But it goes deeper than that. It's the mindset, and it's a mindset that it's nothing to do with one country or another. It's more of a predatory mindset, which is prevalent all over the world, more or less in certain parts, and more in others, less in others, but. It's that we have to defeat. It's a general. The predatory mindset is a general cult of violence in one form or another. It doesn't have to be brutality. Any form of just bullying the others and of wanting of exploiting others one form or another is the problem, and that's what we have to defeat as a race, I think, and we'll have to go through that.
Well, yeah, Perfidious Albion. They've always been very good at carrying out various subtle forms of coercion that people aren't even aware of.
Well, yeah, we can put it that way. I mean, in this general barbarous mindset in which most of the race acquiesces, yeah, certain powers historically have developed more sophisticated ways of achieving their ends. And let's face it, a lot of people are really proud of belonging to that group. Yeah, I know that. When they go through these wars, they wax very emotional and they start saying, we here, we there, and we did this, we did that, when it was their ancestors or maybe people that have nothing to do with them.
Yeah.
We have to lose this fascination with violence.
Yeah.
Completely.
Now, to close it out, there's an ending of your book, I think, which sums up your argument in the book very well. If you don't mind, I'll read it.
Go ahead.
This stratagem of identifying a native force, which can then be directed in a variety of extremely creative ways, either to foment divisions at home or to be spun against a neighbor, is a mere routine. World War I, the conjuration of Hitlerism, World War II are possibly the most spectacular and horrifying examples in our recent historical record of what such imperial routines are capable of engendering. These also reveal that, in general, the true source of evil resides not so much in the actual or often unspeakable villainy of resurrected cults, but rather in the aseptic, cool, and calculating imperial mindset of the modern English-speaking oligarchies, which remorselessly and with an inhuman dose of self-righteousness manage to manipulate all forms of life-destroying manifestations and turn them to account for the purpose of world control, i.e. power. Excellent.
Yeah, well, I wrote this at the time. I remember this. The war in Iraq had just begun, and I was just furious. And it's not that I want to write against the British. Of course, I have no quarrel with. It's that, but the British and a certain kind of elite, they always hearken to and they always invoke the name of the defeat of Hitler in order to wage more wars. I mean, it's just like it's propagandistic capital that seems to give them the right to continue to wage wars because they say, well, once we defeated the Antichrist, and that gives us the right to continue to kill. And I just said to myself, I would like to see an end to this, and maybe it'd be good if we start debunking these stories one by one, and so that we can have peace at last.
Exactly. That's why if you were opposing the Iraq War in 2003 or the Gulf War in 1991, often you heard the accusation that you were forgetting the lessons of Munich.
Yeah, of course. It never ends. Yeah. They're always conjuring that name, always. Mm-hmm. And every time they do it, it's just, it's in bad faith, to put it mildly. And a lot of us just had enough of this. Mm-hmm. And so I said, okay, Hitler, you want to know? Okay, I'll tell you the story to the best of my knowledge, and it's not what they told you.
I tell people that the real history is far more interesting if you want to delve into it. It will take a lot more time. It's far more confusing than the little simplistic, moralistic fairy tale we've been given. So I encourage everybody to go out and purchase a copy of Conjuring Hitler, How Britain and America Made the Third Reich by Guido Preparata, right? Giacomo, sorry. Guido Giacomo Preparata.
Giacomo.
Oh, sorry. Guido Giacomo Preparata. Okay, great. And, of course, your website, you have a website, correct?
Yes. And I encourage everyone to visit it, and there's plenty of materials there. So.
And that's GuidoPreparata.com. You have essays, blog, your books are there, essays you can get. And so go there, read his material. It's great stuff. I want to thank you for spending so much time with me.
My pleasure.
It's been a great talk. And I'll wish you a very pleasant summer in your travels.
Same to you.
And maybe we'll talk again in the near future.
We'll keep in touch. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
This is Ozzy Skateboard, and you're listening to UC